Karen's SUV plowed through my cornfield at dawn like a drunken rhinoceros, sending stalks flying and slamming into the morning air. I stood frozen in the doorway of my farmhouse, heart pounding in disbelief as I watched the vehicle barrel past the shattered remains of what had once been my beloved Scarecrow. Every bit of the scene screamed chaos. The ground was littered with broken corn and splintered wood, and the sight of Karen's SUV, now caked in mud and crop residue, confirmed that nothing would ever be the same. For years, that Scarecrow had been more than a seasonal decoration. It was a symbol of my connection to the land and a testament to the simple ingenuity of rural life. Handcrafted from old barn wood, straw, and a little paint, it stood proud in the middle of my field, a guardian against birds and a quirky landmark for the community. But Karen, in her latest fit of self-righteous indignation, had decided that my Scarecrow was an eyesore, a blemish that did not meet her impossible standards of order. With no warning and no regard for my property, she drove her SUV straight through it, leaving nothing but splinters and scattered straw in her wake. In that split second, as I watched my handiwork reduced to a pile of debris, anger surged through me. I tolerated Karen's meddling for years. Fines for unapproved garden decor, petty complaints about the unsightly colors of my mailbox. But this was personal. This was a declaration of war against my right to live and create on my own land. And I wasn't going to take it lying down. A spark of rebellious creativity ignited. I'd always prided myself on being a resourceful, independent farmer, someone who could turn adversity into opportunity. Karen had just handed me the perfect canvas for that transformation. If she wanted to erase my Scarecrow, then I would build something even grander in its place. Something that would not only reclaim my field, but also serve as a permanent, steel-clad testament to my defiance. And so, with the early light casting long shadows over the ruined field, I vowed to reinvent my Scarecrow, with steel, sparks, and a message Karen would never forget. I've always believed that the heart of rural life beats strongest on a working farm. My little homestead, nestled on the outskirts of the small town of Willow Creek, spans over 150 acres of rich, fertile land. Generations of my family had tilled these fields, and every inch of it told a story of resilience, hard work, and a deep connection to the land. My property isn't just a place to live. It's a sanctuary where creativity, tradition, and modern innovation meet. From the sprawling cornfields to the weathered barn that has stood the test of time, every element of my farm was infused with a sense of purpose and pride. At the center of my fields, my Scarecrow had long been a fixture, a whimsical guardian crafted with care and ingenuity. Made from reclaimed barn wood, straw, and a splash of bright, weather-resistant paint, it had been lovingly constructed each fall as a tribute to simpler times. It was more than just a deterrent for birds. It was a symbol of my creativity, a proud marker of my ability to turn everyday materials into something meaningful. Neighbors would often comment on its character, even if they pretended not to notice its quirky charm. But not everyone in Willow Creek celebrated individuality. In a nearby upscale, gated community of Crescent Meadows, conformity was king. Governed by Draconia Homeowners Association, HOA, Crescent Meadows was a place where every detail was scrutinized and standardized. The HOA prided itself on maintaining an immaculate, uniform appearance, and at the forefront of its enforcement was one woman who had become infamous throughout the area, Karen Miller, or HOA Karen, as she was known to everyone. Karen, in her early 50s, was a force of nature when it came to enforcing the community's rigid rules. Clad in sharply tailored outfits and armed with a clipboard and smartphone, she patrolled Crescent Meadows with an intensity that bordered on fanaticism. To her, every nonconformity was an affront, a blight on the perfection she believed the community demanded. Whether it was a slightly off-center mailbox or a garden ornament that deviated from the approved design, nothing escaped her meticulous gaze. I, however, had always walked to the beat of my own drum. While I respected the need for order, I believed that true beauty lay in the freedom to express oneself. My farm, with its wide open fields and eclectic charm, was my canvas, a place where creativity could flourish. My Scarecrow was a manifestation of that spirit, a seasonal work of art that celebrated the unpredictable, vibrant life of the land. So when Karen's latest act of petty tyranny, smashing my Scarecrow with her SUV, threatened to erase a symbol of my hard-won individuality, it was a personal and public affront I couldn't ignore. Crescent Meadows and Willow Creek were worlds apart. While the residents of Crescent Meadows prided themselves on perfection and uniformity, my farm was a living, breathing rebellion against that sterile mold. I had built my life on these fields, and I wasn't about to let someone like Karen dictate how I expressed myself. The stage was set for an epic clash, a battle between conformity and creativity, between arbitrary rules and the raw, unfiltered spirit of rural independence. The days following the vandalism were a whirlwind of indignation and preparation. Every fine print of the notice Karen had left on my barn, every complaint she'd lodged with the HOA, now fueled my resolve. I gathered evidence. Photos of the shattered remains of my Scarecrow, security footage of Karen's SUV smashing through the cornfield, and testimonials from neighbors who had witnessed the chaos. I needed irrefutable proof that this wasn't an accident or a random act of vandalism. It was a deliberate, calculated strike against my freedom to express myself on my own property. I took to the community forums and social media with my evidence. The reaction was swift and fierce. Neighbors who had long suffered under the oppressive, cookie-cutter rules of Crescent Meadows rallied behind me. Posts with hashtags like #FarmStandFreedom and #NoMoreKaren began trending locally. Many expressed shock at the audacity of Karen's actions, while others, emboldened by my defiance, shared stories of their own brushes with the HOA's overreach. It quickly became clear that Karen's vendetta was not an isolated incident, but a symptom of a deeper, systemic problem, a problem that affected every resident who dared to be different. Fueled by the support and the injustice of it all, I resolved to not just restore my Scarecrow, but to reinvent it in a way that would turn the tables completely. I spent long hours sketching out designs for a new Scarecrow, one that would be built not from straw and wood, but from durable, gleaming steel. I envisioned a towering 20-foot monument that would serve as a living reminder of the consequences of meddling with someone's property. This wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It was a statement, a declaration that while creativity was free to flourish on my land, attempts to suppress it would be met with bold, uncompromising countermeasures. I began the transformation with a mix of determination and careful planning. First, I scavenged the farm for scrap metal, old tools, and any materials that could be repurposed. With the help of a few trusted friends and a local fabricator who share my disdain for conformity, I started constructing the framework for the new Scarecrow. The structure was designed to be both intimidating and awe-inspiring, a gleaming silhouette that would catch the eye of anyone who dared approach my fields. Every piece of steel was meticulously welded and bolted into place. I incorporated elements that represented both the rugged resilience of the farm and a tongue-in-cheek nod to Karen's relentless perfectionism. The eyes of the statue, for instance, were fashioned from polished metal that reflected the surrounding cornfields, while its mouth was set in a permanent scowl that seemed to mock the very notion of petty rule enforcement. I worked late into the night, the sound of the welding torch echoing across the quiet fields as sparks danced like fireflies in the darkness. During the construction, I kept a detailed log of every step, photos, videos, and notes that I later compiled into a digital dossier. This dossier was not only evidence of my creative rebellion, but also a blueprint for anyone who dared to challenge the oppressive hand of overzealous HOA enforcers. I even reached out to local media outlets with snippets of my progress, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. Soon, what began as a personal vendetta turned into a community movement, a rallying cry for creative freedom and the right to innovate on one's own property. Meanwhile, Karen's reaction was swift and incendiary. I heard whispers of her furious phone calls and saw on social media that she had posted a series of angry videos accusing me of defacing property and inciting disorder. But every time she tried to spin her narrative, the community's support grew louder. Neighbors posted messages of solidarity and shared my updates with pride, while local influencers decried the HOA's arbitrary fines and the stifling of individual expression. The tension was mounting, and I knew the next step was inevitable: the unveiling of my steel scarecrow. I scheduled the final reveal for a crisp, clear morning, inviting every neighbor and local media outlet to witness the rebirth of my field's guardian, a guardian that would stand as a testament to the triumph of creativity over conformity. As the day of the unveiling approached, Cedar Ridge was abuzz with anticipation. Social media posts detailing my project, complete with progress photos and behind-the-scenes videos of the welding and assembly, began a trend. Hashtags like hashtag Steel Rebellion and hashtag Scarecrow Revolt took off, and every comment, like, and share added to the growing chorus of support. The digital dossier I had painstakingly compiled became a beacon for residents who had long felt oppressed by the HOA's strict enforcement. They saw in my work a symbol of defiance, a promise that creativity would not be muzzled by petty bureaucratic dictates. Local news outlets, having picked up on the controversy surrounding Karen's previous misdeeds, sent reporters to cover the story. Camera crews were stationed along the edges of my property as I prepared for the final unveiling. Reporters interviewed neighbors who described my steel scarecrow as a towering monument to personal freedom and a daring act of artistic defiance. The narrative began to shift from Karen's petty fines to a broader conversation about the right to express oneself and the importance of innovation in the face of oppressive conformity. Inside the HOA board, tensions simmered as well. Emergency meetings were held, and leaked minutes revealed deep divisions among board members. Some longtime adherents of strict rules tried to defend Karen's record, arguing that rules were rules and that any deviation, no matter how creative, could not be tolerated. But others, swayed by the overwhelming digital evidence and the passionate outpouring of public support, questioned whether the board should continue to endorse such draconian measures. "Our community deserves better," one board member was quoted as saying in a leaked memo. The internal discord was palpable, and it soon became clear that the board's authority was crumbling under the weight of the community's unified voice. As the morning of the unveiling dawned, I stood before my nearly finished steel scarecrow, a towering 20-foot figure that gleamed under the rising sun. Every rivet, every welded seam, and every angular detail was a defiant retort to Karen's attempts to enforce a narrow definition of beauty. I adjusted the final piece, a pair of reflective, steely eyes that seemed to watch over the field, and stepped back to admire my creation. It was more than a sculpture, it was a statement, a living testament that if you try to silence creativity with fines and petty rules, you might just end up facing your own reflection in a work of art that mocks your very existence. I posted a live update on the community forum as I prepared for the unveiling. "Today, we reclaim our fields," I wrote, "and prove that creativity and freedom cannot be fenced in by outdated rules." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Neighbors began streaming the event live from their phones, and soon, a digital countdown was underway. Then, as the clock struck the hour, I pulled the tarp off the steel scarecrow with a flourish. The crowd gasped collectively as the gleaming, 20-foot figure of Karen stood tall in the middle of my cornfield. The statue's features were uncanny: a permanent, frozen scowl, a pair of reflective eyes, and an overall presence that exuded defiance. For a few moments, there was stunned silence as everyone took in the sight. And then, like a dam breaking, cheers erupted from the assembled crowd. Social media lit up with live comments and hashtags celebrating the triumph of creativity over conformity. Karen's reaction, however, was swift and dramatic. I later caught a glimpse of her via security footage as she stood at her window, her face a mix of horror, disbelief, and bitter indignation. In a live video posted on her social media, she sputtered, "This is outrageous. I demand an explanation for this vandalism. But her protest was drowned out by the resounding applause and supportive cheers from the community. The digital evidence, the towering steel scarecrow, the live stream of the event, and the flood of supportive messages had rendered her petty enforcement tactics powerless. In the aftermath, the HOA board was forced to hold emergency meetings and digital petitions demanding reforms in the enforcement of property rights and artistic expression surged to tens of thousands of signatures. The community's unified outcry against arbitrary fines had become a rallying cry for change. My steel scarecrow had not only reclaimed my property, but had ignited a broader movement, a movement that challenged the very foundations of the HOA's oppressive rules. The escalating tension reached a fever pitch as local media continued to cover the story, interviewing residents who spoke passionately about the need for creative freedom and individual rights. "This isn't just about a scarecrow," one neighbor declared on air. "It's about standing up to those who would take our freedom to express ourselves away." The narrative resonated with everyone, and soon, the story of my bold defiance was the talk of Cedar Ridge. I continued to document every moment, uploading videos and detailed posts that chronicled the community's transformation. The digital dossier I had assembled became the cornerstone of a growing movement for reform, and every shared post reinforced the idea that when a community stands united, even the most oppressive forces can be overcome. By the end of the day, it was clear that Karen's reign of petty rule enforcement was crumbling. The final public hearing was scheduled, and it was evident that the community would not rest until significant reforms were made. The stage was set for a decisive showdown, a moment when the collective voice of every resident would force the HOA board to acknowledge the importance of individuality and creative freedom. The decisive moment arrived on a crisp, clear morning at the Cedar Ridge Community Center. The boardroom was packed to capacity with HOA officials, local law enforcement representatives, community leaders, and an impassioned crowd of residents, each one there to witness the final public hearing that would decide the future of our community's enforcement policies. With a calm, yet commanding presence, Councilwoman Emily Daniels stepped up to the podium, her eyes burning with determination and hope. After a thorough review of all digital evidence, including time-stamped security footage, detailed photographic records, and the heartfelt testimonies of our residents, we have reached an inescapable conclusion. Councilwoman Daniels began, her voice resonating with authority. It is abundantly clear that the actions taken by Mrs. Karen Miller, specifically her baseless fines and her repeated attempts to suppress creative expression on private property, were not rooted in any genuine concern for community aesthetics or safety, but were driven solely by personal bias and a flagrant abuse of power. Our community's rights to individual expression and property management must be upheld. A heavy silence fell over the room as Daniels continued. Effective immediately, the HOA board will rescind all fines imposed in relation to these incidents, and we will launch a comprehensive disciplinary review of the policies and practices that allowed such overreach to occur. Furthermore, new guidelines will be implemented to ensure that every resident's right to express themselves, be it through art, farming, or any other lawful enterprise, is protected. Today's decision is not merely about reversing an arbitrary fine. It is a resounding declaration that Cedar Ridge will no longer tolerate the suppression of creativity and individuality. Her words were met with a wave of murmurs and nods of approval from the assembled residents. At that moment, a longtime community advocate, known for his unwavering commitment to individual rights, rose to speak. "Today we stand united," he declared, his voice strong and impassioned. "No one in our community should have their right to live and express themselves stifled by the petty whims of a self-appointed enforcer. Let this vote be the turning point, a clear signal that we value creativity, independence, and the sanctity of private property above all else. We demand accountability, and we will ensure that every violation of our rights is met with swift, decisive action." His declaration was met with thunderous applause, uniting the room in a powerful call for reform. Following his address, a senior officer from the local property oversight office presented the final dossier, a meticulously compiled record of all digital evidence, expert testimonies, and official reports confirming that my farm stand and my subsequent artistic expressions were fully within my legal rights. The evidence was irrefutable, and the Internal Affairs Panel unanimously endorsed strict disciplinary measures against any abuses of power by the HOA. The full report was scheduled for immediate public release. Councilwoman Daniels concluded, "Let this resolution mark the dawn of a new era for Cedar Ridge, a community where individual rights are respected, where public authority is exercised with integrity, and where creative expression is celebrated rather than suppressed." Our vote today is a resounding declaration that we will protect our freedoms and that no one, no matter how self-righteous, can impose their will on our community without accountability. Together, we stand for justice, transparency, and the inalienable right to live creatively and freely. Her final words, delivered with unwavering conviction, sealed the turning point in our struggle for property rights and artistic freedom. In that defining moment, as every face in the boardroom shone with determination and hope, the balance of power shifted irrevocably. The overwhelming digital evidence and the unified voice of the community forced the HOA board to take decisive action, a turning point that would forever reshape the governance of Cedar Ridge. The days of petty fines and arbitrary enforcement were over, and a future built on respect for individual rights was finally within our grasp. In the weeks following the historic vote, Cedar Ridge experienced a remarkable transformation. News of the rescinded fines and the sweeping reforms enacted by the HOA board spread rapidly through local media and social networks, sparking passionate debates about property rights, creative freedom, and the importance of individual expression. Editorials in the local newspaper, with headlines such as "A New Dawn for Cedar Ridge" and "Community United for Creative Freedom," celebrated the decisive actions taken to safeguard every resident's right to manage their own property without fear of arbitrary interference. Hashtags like hashtag property rights, hashtag no more bullying, and hashtag art is freedom trended widely, reinforcing our collective determination to stand against oppressive rule enforcement. Town hall meetings and community forums saw record attendance as residents gathered to share their own experiences and envision a future where creativity and individuality were not only tolerated but celebrated. Neighbors who had long felt suppressed by the stringent guidelines of the HOA now spoke proudly about their right to live on their own terms. Our land is our legacy, and we must protect it with every ounce of our being, one impassioned resident declared at a bustling meeting, his voice ringing clear across the room. The atmosphere was charged with hope, a promise that Cedar Ridge would always honor the creative spirit of its residents. Within the reformed HOA board and local public safety departments, swift changes were implemented. Senior officials, led by Director James Carter and Lieutenant Marcus Reed, launched comprehensive training programs focusing on ethical conduct, cultural sensitivity, and the responsible management of community resources. Regular internal audits and transparent disciplinary procedures were established to ensure that every complaint was carefully scrutinized and that no resident would ever again suffer from arbitrary fines or punitive measures. Our duty is to protect the rights and dignity of every member of our community, Lieutenant Reed affirmed during a follow-up press conference, reinforcing our renewed commitment to justice and fairness. Community leaders and local civil rights organizations mobilized further, organizing workshops, public forums, and educational campaigns that empowered residents and encouraged active participation in shaping a more equitable governance model. When we stand together, our voices have the power to reshape our community and break down barriers. A local activist proclaimed at a town hall meeting, inspiring neighbors to unite in the fight for creative and individual freedom. For me, the journey from confrontation to resolution was both deeply personal and profoundly transformative. My decision to stand up against HOA Karen's arbitrary fines and to turn her transgressions into a bold act of creative defiance by constructing a 20-foot steel scarecrow had not only restored my right to express myself, but had ignited a movement that resonated throughout Cedar Ridge. Neighbors, once cowed by the fear of fines and arbitrary rule enforcement, found their voices and shared their own stories of resilience. The digital evidence that exposed Karen's petty tactics became a beacon of hope and a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the sanctity of private property and the freedom to innovate. Karen Miller, once the formidable enforcer of the HOA's draconian policies, was now reduced to a cautionary tale, a vivid reminder that no one is above accountability when a community stands united for justice. Her influence waned rapidly as digital records of her past transgressions circulated widely, underscoring the need for reform and the dangers of unchecked authority. At a final celebratory event held in the Central Park of Cedar Ridge, residents, local officials, and community advocates gathered under the warm glow of the setting sun. A large banner reading "Unity, Freedom, and Property Rights" was unfurled between towering oak trees, and heartfelt speeches echoed promises of a brighter, more inclusive future. Today, we celebrate our victory over arbitrary interference, a victory for every homeowner and every creative spirit in our community, Councilwoman Daniels proclaimed, her voice resolute and inspiring. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful affirmation of our collective commitment to protect our freedoms and ensure that no one can abuse public power again. As each new day dawned over Cedar Ridge, the legacy of that fateful confrontation endured as a beacon of transformative change. The story of how HOA Karen's petty destruction of my Scarecrow was met with my bold reinvention into a towering steel monument, and how her SUV, a symbol of her oppressive authority, metaphorically paid the price, became a rallying cry for every resident who believed in the power of creative defiance and the sanctity of private property. Every sunrise now carried with it the promise that in Cedar Ridge, truth, justice, and the right to live and innovate freely would forever prevail. In the end, what began as a personal battle evolved into a watershed moment for our entire community. We emerged more united, more vigilant, and more determined to safeguard our rights against any form of bureaucratic overreach. And as the sun rose each morning over our reclaimed neighborhood, it carried with it the promise that Cedar Ridge would forever be a place where creativity, integrity, and respect for individual expression shone as brightly as the dawn.